Procedures. In this nugget, we'll be talking about certain procedures within a hack. The first thing we'll be discussing is several key components that you'll need to keep in mind, the most important of which will be a legal contract, and I've talked about that a little bit before, but there's some more specific details I'll give you here. And we'll also talk about the 5 steps that are involved in a hack, and we'll be doing those 5 steps as we go throughout the rest of this series. One of the most important things to keep in mind is the human element. We as hackers tend to think of everything in terms of just technical details. Well, ultimately, you're going to have to deal with people here, and especially when you're dealing with certain IT departments, that can really be a fiery issue, so you'll have to keep some of those things in mind. We're also going to be working with red teams whenever possible, and this is so that we can collect a series of strengths that different hackers have, and as a team, be able to hack more efficiently. We'll also take a look at certain legal aspects of your hack. I remember years ago in college, I had a crush on this girl, and I decided I'd go ahead and ask her out. So I asked her out, and she said, well, that'd be great, but you'll have to talk to my dad. I said, oh, okay, that's fine. I'll respect that. Apparently dad wants to keep an eye on the daughter, and everything. So I thought I'd give the dad a call, and I said, hey, hi, Dad, I'd like to take your daughter out. And he said, well, what are you planning on doing? Where are you planning on going? I said, oh, I don't know yet. I hadn't really planned on anything specific quite yet. Wrong answer. He said, well, I don't want you just driving around town thinking, oh, what do you want to do now? I want you to have a plan in place, and I want you to tell me where you're going to be and what you're going to be doing. And so I agreed to that, and when I picked up this girl for the date, I had printed out an itinerary of where we were going to be at every hour of that date. Well, I'll tell you, when you're going to be a certified ethical hacker, you also have to have a big plan, a good plan, and a well-defined plan before you ever start hacking. And it starts off with being properly prepared. And just as I had prepared a defined itinerary with everything that we were going to be doing and where we were going to be for this data that I had in college, you're going to also have a similar kind of a document for your preparation phase of a certified ethical hack. And although there's probably not going to be any candlelight dinners involved in this preparation phase, you are going to be able to clearly define everything that's going to go on. Let's talk about what some of those kinds of things are. First of all, it's going to be just a formal contract that's going to be signed. It's going to have a lot of different things in it, and you need to find a lawyer that is reasonably technically savvy. One of the lawyers that I've worked with in the past, and I don't work with anymore with technical issues, he has to have a secretary turn on the computer for him. So I knew right away when I went to my first meeting that this was not going to be good. He wasn't going to get what I'm trying to do. He's good with different kinds of law, but not the kind of thing that we're looking at. So find a lawyer who's reasonably good technically and can kind of get some thumbnail idea of what you're trying to do. You'll need to pay this lawyer a few $100s to come up with some kind of a boilerplate contract for you that will outline different components of the hack that you're about to perform. Now, I say boilerplate because that'll change with each client. There'll be places where you'll need to fill in, in Microsoft Word or whatever, where you need to fill in different parameters of the hack, the time schedule, the pay, all those different kinds of things. One of the things that's also going to be involved in this preparation phase with the contract is going to be, and I'll put these over to the side here, non-disclosure. Non-disclosure. And this is going to guarantee that you, as the certified ethical hacker, if you do stumble across or deliberately find some information that's confidential or proprietary company information or anything else that's not already known to the general public, that you will not disclose that to anyone else. In fact, a lot of companies will require that you cannot even say that you ever worked for them. And when I say companies, I mean also government agencies and that kind of thing. But they will require that you can't even say that you ever were a contractor for them. Or for example, last time I did contract work for Microsoft, they said that I could say that I did some contract work for Microsoft, but I can't really say exactly what it was that I did. One of the last contracts I did, the most that they said I could say was that I was an official contributor to the MCP program, which is the division that does, MCSC and MCSD and all of those kinds of things. Now, that's going to be pretty difficult to do in terms of temptation. If you pull off some elegant hack and you're able to really get some juicy information out of a company, that's tough not to brag to all your friends and all your co-hackers about that kind of thing, but you got to really follow that because word does get out, and if you start to blab that, it could really come back on you. Another thing to consider there, by the way, is if you, in your hack, if you reveal some secrets of hacking that are proprietary to you that you've come up with or that are original with you, that you also require that the company not disclose that to anybody else. I mean, that is kind of a trade secret for you as a hacker. And it can't just be something generic like I used Nmap. Well, everybody uses Nmap. But if there's something tool that you've come up with or some specific method that you can make specifically yours or kind of trademark, so to speak, that is yours, then you can also make sure that that is not disclosed as well. You also probably want to put in there a legal clause that will protect you as a hacker. So I'll just put the word protect in here. And this is to protect you legally speaking because you might attract some unwanted attention during the conduct phase, which is the next phase we'll talk about. That's where you're actually going to be performing these hacks. And it could be that while you're performing your hacks, if you uncover weaknesses that were even more severe than the company suspected, and that you're able to touch data or something like that that they didn't want you to touch, that didn't realize that you were going to be able to touch it. Well, you might want to put that in advance in the contract that says, hey, if I stumble across something while I'm going, since you're kind of going through a maze blindly, you don't really know what you're going to touch on at every turn. So in the contract, you might want to have something in there that protects you as the hacker as well. Other things you might want to take a look at there would be infrastructure. Remember in our last nugget, we talked about black box attacks, infrastructure. Okay, I guess I just need neither. Talking about black box as opposed to white box attacks and that kind of thing, which relates to how much knowledge you have of the network infrastructure or any of other parameters within that company. Well, you need to define what your working infrastructure is. That way, if they've given you a cubicle, for example, to work out of within the building, and you start to hack into the company from a white box hack, but it turns out that when you're done with everything and you come to your conclusions and you report to them that you were able to hack into something as a white box hack, then they might come back and say, well, wait a minute, we didn't want that. We wanted you to see if you could get to our website from the internet. Well, see, that's where you have to have this clearly defined. What your parameters are and what your infrastructure knowledge can be there. Also, you're going to talk about the perimeter of the attack. Perimeter. Then the perimeter of the attack is very similar to the infrastructure of the attack, at least in terms of what you can immediately access. But the perimeter is also going to define what you're supposed to attack. If they just want to see if you can hack into their web servers from the internet, and while you're doing that, maybe you figure out the password for their web servers, and if you got curious and said, hey, I wonder if that password also works on the SQL servers or on the domain controllers. Well, if you go into those areas and they didn't invite you to that through the contract, then that could be a problem. So make sure that that's clearly defined in the perimeter. That protects both you and the client. Although I'll admit that there are also some gray areas here. For example, if you use a password cracking utility, maybe you pulled the password cracking hashes off of some kind of an authentication server. Well, they didn't pay you to crack into the authentication server, but the password that you hack is the password for the administrator on the web server. So there's a little bit of a leapfrogging going on in there. You'll just have to kind of feel your way with that, and you might want to define that with the client. And at least say something to the effect of, I will not make deliberate and direct attacks on computers that I have not been authorized to hack against. Other things that you might put in the contract would be what kinds of activities you're going to be performing. One thing you want to be sure about here as well is you'll have to deal with some human factors, and we're going to be talking about this shortly here. But we want to be able to also put in the contract that the corporation and their IT department not change any settings on their systems from the time you start the attack or from the time you start your negotiations here until the time that you're done with your penetration test. That's because a lot of network administrators, as soon as they know someone's trying to do a pen test, they'll say, ooh, okay, I'm going to tighten up this security, now I'm going to tighten up that security. Well, that's not really an accurate picture of what their security was like beforehand. So you might want to put in there also that they should not change anything beyond what it has been historically established to be. And then any changes that need to be made will be after you're done, where you show them where the weaknesses are. And you'll also put in here just your schedule. Of course, the longer you work there, and you're going to be working a lot of long hours when you're doing a pen test. Some guys I know don't get any sleep at all for a couple of days on end at times. A lot of hackers only sleep 3 or 4 hours a night. So this could go on for a good while, and it can be quite exhausting. But typically, a hack is going to be roughly in the area of 2 to 4 weeks. Some are as short as 1 week, but usually about 2 to 4 weeks. Again, the longer they want you there, then the more it's going to cost them. And there is good value in that as well, because a lot of hacks take months to pull off. So really, a hack of 2 to 4 weeks might be a pretty narrow period of time if they're trying to compare it vulnerability against black hat hackers. And then you'll also have defined there the resources that are available to you. I mean, will you be able to work from within the office in a white box attack? Will you have a cubicle available? Will you be able to roam from one department to the other, or are you going to perform it all from one location? Typically, it can perform it all from one location anyway, so that might not be too big of an issue. Other resources, however, could be things such as whether you will be granted a generic user account, such as a domain user account, just like any other employee would be granted, and whether or not you can use resources such as a red team. Now, this will directly contribute to the price they're going to have to pay. A red team, which we'll talk about shortly here, is just a gang of hackers, basically, is what it is. And most of the time, we try to use more than one person when we perform a pen test. And of course, that's going to cost them more, but it's also going to give them a very accurate picture of their security vulnerabilities. So once we get beyond the preparation and we've got all our contract all set up over here, it's supposed to be a square, but anyway, once we get our contract, it looks like some kind of a molar or something. Then the next thing we're going to do is actually get to work and start the hack. And by the way, you're probably wondering, when are we going to start the hacking? So far we're talking about all these things. These things I have to present these to you because these are an important part of the CEH exam objectives, and the EC Council does consider these things to be important, so I've got to bring them up to you. The other thing that we'll do then again is to actually conduct the penetration test. And let me also split hairs with you here as well. Sometimes I'll say vulnerability test, sometimes I'll say penetration test or pen test. There is a slight difference. A vulnerability test does not require any stealth. We're just trying to look for any vulnerabilities, and we're not really trying to pretend to be a hacker quite as much. With a pen test, that's where we're actually trying to look a little bit more like a black hat hacker and come from the perspective of a black hat hacker. The reason why that's different is because a hacker who's good will also keep a very low profile, and they don't want to be detected. So we'll try to do the whole thing without any detection. It's also a little bit slower, actually quite a lot slower than a vulnerability test, because you can kind of hit a barrage of attacks using a vulnerability test. However, using a penetration test, you got to be very stealthy, which means that you have to take a little bit slower too. In any case, here's where you're going to be using all your tools, and you'll also be making careful notes and everything, and doing your keystroke logging and all of that. Then finally, you'll come to the conclusion. This is after the conduct phase is completed. And this is going to be where you simply report your findings. You're going to identify exactly what steps you took to be able to get to certain vulnerabilities, and that's going to help them to be able to plug their security holes. Because, of course, a big part of plugging security holes is knowing how somebody got in. And until you know those vulnerabilities at times, you're not going to be able to do anything about it. Now, this is what they're actually paying for, at least in terms of their physical deliverables. The report that sits on their desk when you're done with this, you should go through it probably with like PowerPoint slides and a verbal presentation and everything. But this is going to be what they think they paid for here. So don't just scrawl your notes on the back of a dinner napkin and hand that to them, because they're not going to want to pay thousands of dollars for that. Make sure it looks good, very clearly defined, very organized, written in good English and grammar, which is really difficult, I know, for hackers to do. But do that as best you can. And make sure that you also include in it suggestions for how to tighten up certain areas of security. I also recommend that in the report, you make a certain number of copies for whoever needs to see the report, and you put on each report exactly how many copies there are and who they were given to, and you only identify the vulnerabilities in that hard copy report, not electronically like in email or something that could potentially get forwarded to company enemies or competitors or any other malicious parties. And that way you can always say it's your responsibility now to identify and track these hard copies, or if you want to shred them, you can go ahead and do that, and then just please document that or whatever. That way it can also be clearly pointed out that you did not email it to somebody in such a way that was insecure, or that you did not allow it to be forwarded to unauthorized parties. Now, as you start your attack, there are 5 basic steps to the attack, and the first one is going to be reconnaissance. This is where we are doing our footprinting, if you will, so that we can identify what the network looks like, what the organization looks like, and where we can identify potential vulnerabilities. And this all starts with passive reconnaissance. One of the parts of passive reconnaissance will be simply browsing the web. Go to the company website, see if you can enter in some kind of convoluted URLs when you're trying to access their web, and see if it allows directory browsing, for example, which was not a good idea in any case, but in some cases, websites have been left on inadvertently so that they allow directory browsing. And that means then that you can possibly access portions of their web you're not supposed to be able to get to. For example, I've seen websites with documents, text documents, in certain directories that I've been able to access because of directory browsing that had password lists in them. Very handy to find. That was an easy hack. But that's a little bit more active. Most of the passive attacks are going to be doing other things, such as looking up, an Edgar database. If you go to certain websites, you can look up information about a specific company. And we'll talk a lot about all of those things again here as we go. But you can find out who the shareholders are in a certain company, if it's a smaller company. Or you can find out who the CEO is, or who all the different officers are in the company. You can do certain kinds of research on those persons individually and see if there's anything revealing that you can find out. For example, if the CEO grew up in Poughkeepsie, New York, well, try that for his password. See if you can use the word Poughkeepsie or some variation thereof. It's a little bit painstaking to go through all of the things of a person's life and try to determine what their password is, but most people, especially that are not technical, will use passwords that they can remember easily and that come from their background somehow. Also, there's an active attack. This is going to be the majority of the actual attack phase itself. This is where you're going to be using network tools, where you're going to be using SolarWinds type tools, or HPing2, or any number of other kinds of tools that you can use to identify weaknesses within that company. So then we'll also take a look at the scanning phase. That's where you're going to be using tools like Nmap, which I keep mentioning, and that's a scanning tool. That's what it does. Might as well also point out to you right now that as we go, you're going to see that you're going to need to know Nmap as much as any other tool, and the Certified Ethical Hacker exam objectives. That is a very important tool. You should know all the switches to it. You'll see more about that as we go. Now, it's in the scanning phase that you can identify potential weaknesses. For example, FTP operates on ports 20 and 21 for control and for data. So if you find one of those ports open, you know that there's going to be, possibly going to be at least, an FTP server back behind the firewall somewhere, and you might try to attempt to gain access then. One of the other things about FTP is, unless they've done something to add additional encryption to an FTP session, well, all the authentication takes place in the clear, so anybody with a packet sniffer can snatch passwords right out of the air. So once you've done that, maybe you've gained a password or somehow, you gain access to a server, then what you want to do is to maintain that access. And how are we going to do that? Typically, what we're going to do is not use the same password that we cracked originally. If you can make your way up to root, or something like a domain admin or an enterprise level admin if you're in a Microsoft environment, then what I would do is to just create an account with domain admin privileges, or at least with very high level privileges, and then just let it sit there. Try to make it as unobvious as possible. That way, if you get cut off from your original point of attack, you still have another account in your back pocket that you can pull out and still be able to use it to log on to computers and perform any kind of damage necessary. Then you can also cover your tracks. That's going to be also a very important part of this. Remember that if you're doing a pen test, that you want to be able to cover your tracks so that you don't get found out. Because in reality, if an IT department found out that there was a hacker trying to access their networks, they would shut down their IP address, they would try to identify some other things about the attack, and you don't want that to happen because that'll slow you down in your pen test. And plus, you also want to monitor, or mirror actually, what a black hat cracker would do if they were any good. And they do cover their tracks. They delete logs of their activity. So if they get root level access, for example, then they can, of course, manipulate or delete logs. Also, with Windows machines, by default anyway, unless you're using other tools, and there are some tools that will do this, you can delete those logs as well, but then it creates an event log entry in the security event log that you did indeed clear that event log. So it's a little bit circular in that respect, but at least you delete some of the specific steps that you might have taken there. And for Windows boxes, you might have other or better results if you use an executable called clearlogs.exe, and there's another one called WinZapper that you may also be able to use to clear those logs. Now, in your penetration test here, the human element is going to be a huge issue, especially when it comes down to the end, where you get to the conclusion phase, and also in the beginning when you're using the social engineering phase. But one thing you want to be careful of in the concluding phases here is that you have effective communication, because if you try to communicate the hacks that you've been pulling and the results that you came up with, and you're not a good speaker, and you're not very clear in your communication, then the client is going to start to doubt what you're saying. They're not going to be clear about what you're saying. They're going to start to get frustrated because they're not going to be sure what you're trying to say, and they're going to be paying thousands of dollars for this. So you might as well use somebody that's a good communicator. And when we talk about red teams in a little while here, I would pick a member from your red team that is a good communicator, even if they're not the one that did most of the work. This doesn't mean that they're taking credit for the whole thing. They're just reporting the entire team's findings here. You're also going to be running into political issues. You probably don't know much about how the IT department interoperates with one another, whether they like each other, whether they get along, or anything like that. And that's not a technical issue, but it certainly is a human issue, and it can really have a big effect also upon security. And especially the larger the organization, the more people have to work together, the more you're going to run into this. IT people have a tendency to be kind of stubborn and opinionated as well. And we always think that our opinion is the right one. And when we can always come up with an argument for why the other person is wrong. So when you go into the meeting and you conclude your vulnerability testing and you say, hey, we found a weakness in the Exchange server, then someone from the SQL side is going to say, I told you guys you should have fixed this, and then you're going to get a big argument going back and forth and so forth. And then the Exchange people are going to say, well, it doesn't have anything to do with SQL anyway. It has to do with the firewall. The hackers got through the firewall. You should have talked to the network department about that. So this can really go round and around. And in fact, I was in one test a couple of years ago back at a large security company, not security, a defense contractor company. And I had gone to dinner the night before with one of the guys, and he had been taking some pills for a bad heart. And then, as I was sitting in a server console showing them some things that I was able to do, they got into this gigantic argument behind me. And the guy that had been taking the heart pills the night before, I was just sure he was going to fall over dead with a massive coronary or something. Fortunately, that didn't happen. But you will get into some awkward positions here, and you just have to, cover your head and hopefully let it pass. This can be a pretty heated thing. Also, another thing that's going to happen there, by the way, politically speaking, is that sometimes they will just totally doubt what you're doing, and that comes into our next issue, and that is fear, uncertainty, and doubt, or FUD. Fear, uncertainty, and doubt. This is a big human element that's possibly the most powerful of all of them. I had a friend of mine years ago that was an excellent salesman. He was I think he was a life insurance salesman, and he said the most powerful tool that he had was not saving money or getting the best prices or anything like that. The most powerful sales tool he had was fear. What if you die and leave your children destitute? What if you didn't have a life insurance policy? What if you don't have medical insurance and you come out and it turns out you have cancer? Do you want to bankrupt your whole family? I mean, it would just... the fear is a powerful sales tool. Now, you can use that as an ethical hacker, and that's what you use often to get your foot in the door. You say, there's probably going to be some vulnerabilities in your organization. Here's where they might be. Here's why you might want to hire us. But this is also going to be a big issue that will work against you because, it might be that the CTO or the CIO has hired you to come in and do the penetration test and not notified the IT department that this has happened. And then once you're done with your evaluation, you go into the meeting with the IT department and tell them everything you found. Sometimes they will really react strongly to that. I know one guy I know is a hacker that does this an awful lot. He went into the meeting and he said, here's a vulnerability that I found, here's how I got in, and he outlined every single step he took. He used his keystroke logging utility, he showed them everything, and sometimes you can also do this, by the way, and that is to use some kind of a screenshot recording software like I'm using to record right now, this video, and you can actually make a video of all the steps you're taking. Well, he did a video of the stuff that he was doing, and even after that, the IT guy that was giving him the hardest time says, no, you didn't. I know you faked that video. That can be done. I've seen Forrest Gump. I know how they can put John Kennedy into any picture. All this kind of stuff. So it was kind of messy. And this whole thing, when you're up against fear, uncertainty, and doubt, this is where your people skills will be more important than ever. This is where you need to be diplomatic, and you need to be able to keep the tension level as low as you can. Now, that's not going to happen oftentimes when you're showing them the vulnerabilities that happen. A lot of this will still have to do with the human element, however, when you present the vulnerabilities. Don't say, your security sucks. Look what I found. You guys didn't even put the right password on your router. You just left the default password. Anybody could get into this. What are you guys, idiots? Well, you're not going to be able to talk that way to people, even if you're absolutely correct. So what you want to be able to do is to make sure that you have good diplomatic people skills here as well. And say, sometimes people install these routers and they do have a default password. Sometimes people forget to change the password. I know we're all busy in what we're doing. Apparently someone forgot to change it on this one, but hey, that's easy enough to change. Even as soon as we're done here, that can be changed at any time you want. See, that's a whole different approach than when you get the fear, uncertainty, and doubt issues, where you're attacking people and people feel like they're in jeopardy. And in fact, a lot of times IT departments will feel that their jobs are in jeopardy when you have uncovered things. And that's where you need to provide the solutions. And when you provide the solutions, that will help the IT department as well. And you need to equip them to be able to know how to do their jobs better. Don't just say, you guys are vulnerable with your SQL Server. You guys did not apply the proper patches, and now everybody's going to be able to steal your data. Well, tell them what patch they should have applied. Tell them how they can get things up to date. Tell them where they were weak and how you can provide a solution for that. If you just give them only the weaknesses, then they're going to really look bad in front of their boss, and things will not go well in that respect. Because one of the things to remember here is, after you're done with your pen test, these people that you've presented the report to, they're going to talk to other people that they know about what you did. What you want to do is to leave them thinking, wow, that was cool. That was a cool hack. I didn't know we had that vulnerability, but at least we know how to fix it now, and I'm going to tell my friends about it. So, that's the kind of thing that, at least anything that they can say without giving something away. So that's the important things to keep in mind in terms of the human element. Now, I mentioned red teaming a little bit earlier. Let's talk about what red teaming is. This is simply a gang of hackers, and these will be people that hopefully are other certified ethical hackers or other trustworthy individuals with good reputations in the community that have not been known to hack into things illegitimately. You don't want to hire the 14-year-old from Denmark that's been able to hack into databases illegally and do all kinds of other stuff like that. You need to hire reputable people to work along with you. Some hackers I know do some work by themselves. Most hackers do like to work in gangs, at least occasionally, or at least on special projects. And when you're doing a pen test, it's really worth your while if you can do that. One of the things that this is going to help is it's going to help your timeline. Remember I said a lot of hacks are 2 to 4 weeks long. For one person to try to hack, especially pretty hardened targets, for only a couple of weeks, they might not get anywhere. And for some companies, they're paying you thousands of dollars. They want to see that you came up with something that was a weakness against them. Overall, it's good news if you couldn't. That means they were secure. But if you hire a red team to come along with you, and if you budget properly for that, then that can really help you to make a lot of headway, and you can use the strengths of other people. A lot of red teams will have people with different strengths in different areas. Maybe somebody really understands well different routing iOSs and the Cisco routing iOS, and they're able to work their way through Cisco routers. Maybe somebody else is an excellent programmer. Maybe they can come up with some kind of a customized script or something like that that will be able to open up holes for your team. Maybe you've got somebody else who's really good with web applications and Java applets and all of those kinds of things, and they can go to work against the intranet web pages or the public internet web pages either way. Now, one of the key components you'll have with a red team is the red team leader. This is probably also going to be the spokesperson for the group or the mouthpiece for the group to the company itself. This is probably going to be the person that also makes the report at the conclusion. Now, the red team leader is not necessarily the strongest technical person in the red team. Sometimes the red team leader is the least technical person among those people. The reason why you need a red team leader, however, is because they have leadership capabilities. Remember, a lot of hackers are very opinionated and independent. You need somebody to bring the red team together, help them to work together well, and to come up with a team solution. Of course, they're going to be technical enough to understand what everybody is doing, but they might not be the most technical of all the people there. And again, this is probably going to be the person that writes the reports and delivers the presentations at the end. The last two red teams that I worked on, I had different red team leaders for both of those. I wasn't the red team leader on those. And the first guy was one of those guys that kind of governs by committee. And he says, what does everybody think if we do this? What does everybody think if we do that? Well, when you get a bunch of highly opinionated people in one room, everybody's got their own opinion of how everything should be done. And that was kind of a mess because we spent most of the time debating who was right about certain viewpoints. The second time that we had somebody, a red team leader, a different one, this guy, I underestimated him. He was kind of quiet, and he never usually said much in other things that we'd worked on. And this time, when he stepped up to be the red team leader, he was able to bring everybody together. He told everybody what they were going to do. He gave them assigned jobs, clearly defined parameters for what we were doing, and it went a lot more smoothly. So, that's just leadership skills that play into that. Now let's get into the legal aspects of all of this, and this is as good a time as any for a lawyer joke. There was a lawyer driving down the road in his big BMW, and he was driving and he was singing to himself, I love my BMW, I love my BMW, and he was so focusing on his car and not his driving that he smashes into a tree. Well, miraculously, he survives, but his car, of course, was totaled. Oh, my BMW, he sobbed. And then a good Samaritan drove by and said to the lawyer, Sir, you're bleeding, and goodness, your left arm is gone. The lawyer, horrified, screamed, my Rolex, my Rolex. Well, you see, there are a lot of legal aspects that, whether you like lawyers or not, you have to have these things in mind. First of all, again, you always need to have a contract, and I've kind of emphasized that a lot in the past, so I won't belabor that anymore right now. But the other thing you need to keep in mind is a specific federal criminal code related to computer crime, and there's several different ones, but the one that specifically relates to certified ethical hackers is 18 USC section 1030. That's what that strange symbol is. I didn't write that very well, but section 1030, and that's fraud and related activity in connection with computers. That's just an answer that you probably will need to know. That's an important certified ethical hacker exam objective, so I would remember this in particular. All right, also there in the legal aspects, there's going to be some necessary evils that, again, cause ethical hackers to sometimes be unethical. And these will be just things that I'll leave you on your own to determine whether or not you're going to do this. For example, one of the ways that we want to be able to break into a network is to make sure that, of course, we're not detected. Well, how can you do that? There's a couple of different ways. One thing you can do is, of course, if this is your computer here, and this is your target over here, this is the computer you're trying to hack into, you don't want to hack directly into that computer, because if they have intrusion detection software or something like that there, or an alert administrator, they could trace your IP address back and identify you and shut down any access from your IP address. So what you would do instead would be to find an unwitting third party, and you can perform an attack against this person's computer. This might just be Joe Consumer out there or something like that. And what you'll do then is do a spoofing attack, for example, where you'll set up some kind of a Trojan or something like here, and maybe you're trying to do a DOS attack on this computer here, or something like that, any kind of an attack. Well, what you'll do then is to remote control this computer, so to speak, to be able to perform queries against this computer, to maybe do port scans or whatever it is that you want it to do. Now, if they detect that they're being attacked somehow from this computer, they can, again, shut down that person's IP address. But then that puts you in a questionable legal position. What if this company here that's being attacked goes to the ISP of this host right here and says, hey, this person's attacking us? Well, now they are potentially in legal trouble because the attack is originating from their computer. And do you, as an ethical hacker, want to jeopardize somebody else? Another good example of this is ethical hackers and every other kind of hacker typically finds these computers, and you want to find a high-speed computer that's well connected to the internet. Where do we find an abundance of those that are not very well protected? Colleges and universities, any.edu basically, because students at these educational universities are very, very liberal in terms of their civil rights and so forth, and I'm not putting that down in any respect, but they say, you don't have any right to put antivirus software on my computer, you don't have any right to put anti-spyware software on my computer, I ought to be able to do whatever I want to on the internet, including be infected with viruses. So most EDU college campuses and so forth are just packed full of viruses and Trojan horses, and that gives us as hackers the ability to go through there. However, here's where the necessary evils part comes in. We don't have a contract to hack against this student's computer up here. We have a contract to hack against this guy. So, are you really going outside of the scope or out of your bounds by going through that EDU first? And in the letter of the law, you probably are. In the spirit of the law, perhaps you're not, because you're under contract to this company to see whether or not a black hat hacker could penetrate their network. And that's exactly what you're doing. You're taking the same route that a black hat hacker would. But you should be aware that, according to the the letter of the law, at least, you could still be in trouble with that. So, in any case, now is also a good time to point out a legal disclaimer on the behalf of CBT Nuggets and myself. And that is simply, and this probably goes without saying, but I need to say it officially anyway here. We do not encourage you to do any illegal hacks. We don't encourage you to hack against EDUs. Even if it sounds like I'm telling you to do that, our official statement is we don't ever want you to perform any illegal hacks, and if you do, they're solely your responsibility. We only want you to perform according to the letter of the law what a certified ethical hacker would do, and that is to only perform attacks against targets for which you have explicit and clear permission. In this nugget, we looked at various procedures within a hack, and we started off by taking a look at some fundamental components, starting with the preparation, which involves the contract as well as all of the important elements within that contract, conducting the actual hack itself, or conducting the actual penetration test, and then the conclusion. We take a look also here at 5 steps that take place from within a hack, such as the reconnaissance and the scanning, maintaining, covering tracks being the last step, and so forth. We also took a look at the human element, which is not to be underestimated, because the way you get paid ultimately could depend on how you handle the humans in this whole process. Some of the humans you're going to be dealing with also, by the way, are red team members. Remember, the red team is going to be a team of people with different strengths that can help you to perform a hack more efficiently. And then we concluded with some legal information that is important to know. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.